On the H-1B that allows for site visits, making them mandatory. Welcome back to Visa Vibes, the podcast where we decode U.S. immigration trends for businesses, professionals, entrepreneurs, HR leaders. I'm Emily Newman, managing partner of Reddy Newman Brown PC, and today we're going to be diving into the biggest employment-based immigration developments shaping 2025 so far.
Yeah, and I'm Stephen Brown, a partner here with Reddy Newman Brown PC, and we're through the first fiscal quarter of President Trump 2.0 era, and we're going to talk about some of the major developments facing employment-based immigration so far. There's been a ton on immigration in general. We're going to focus on employment-based immigration. So, Emily, let's get into it.
Yeah, so I want to first point out that with such a short time period that Trump's been in office, we have maybe just one piece of legislation that's actually been passed, the Laken Riley Act. We have maybe one regulation that's gone through that's specifically to employment-based immigration. So no changes in law or regulations, but so many changes in interpretation and new things that they're doing. So,
yeah, full disclosure, I think some of these are going to be carryover of things that have been going on. It's just, let's talk about where we are through the first 3 months.
All right, first up, perm processing delays. Definitely not a new thing. Been going on really since COVID, 2020, October is when we first started seeing that. So perm applications are taking now more than 14 months to adjudicate. This is not counting the time it takes you to get the prevailing wage determination or the time it takes to do the actual recruitment process, which can be up to 6 months. So with that, and then even if it's audited, which is a possibility, they do randomly select some, there's audit triggers for some, that can take even longer, adding another 3, 4, 5 months to the process. So really, you need to plan to start your perm process at least 18 months before your H-1B maxes out. We would say 2 years. So when you get to the 4-year mark of your H-1B, if you have not started the perm process, you're already behind unless your employer's already got ads in process, doing batch filings and that sort of things. So you really have to think about your timeline of maxing out of H-1B so that you can continue to extend beyond that 6-year limit, avoid the last minute rush of filing in case you're getting close to that 6-year limit or close to the 5-year limit to be able to get the 7th year extension based on a perm that was filed 365 days before your 6-year limit is reached. Otherwise, you might have to leave the country or change of status or do recapture time, take strategic trips outside the U.S. It is a big hassle, and people are still not catching up to this idea that they need to do perm early.
Yeah, I think what's interesting is, when 2017, first Trump administration, and the thought is start before your 5th year, just in case things go weird. We'll have the 7th year extension because it's pending for more than a year. And now our general guidance is start in your 4th year, maybe the 3rd year, because even the PWD, the prevailing wage, takes long. And that 7-year extension requires the perm, the 9089, to be filed. So it's completely crazy, especially for a system designed to be in 2004 to take so quick.
Right. Yeah. And we know that there are no plans in place from the DOL to address processing times based on some litigation that we've dealt with.
Number 2, and this was really a topic we hit on a lot in our last episode, what the F1. I did. Yeah, I thought that was kind of fun. It's kind of been my go-to the last few weeks. About F1 visa instability affecting OPT, STEM OPT, and then any future employment-based immigration, whether it's an H-1B, a O-1, a TN, even a green card. This month, they've been taking some very harsh actions against F1 students who've had any time they were fingerprinted for a crime. And it was telling Emily today, one that I was working on, he was stopped for driving too slow, 10 miles under, did a field sobriety test, passed. They brought him in for a blood test, no drugs or alcohol, gave him a ticket for driving too slow which I didn't know was a thing, except, I get irritated here driving in Houston. Um, and now his SEVIS has been terminated, and that's impacting his STEM OPT. He doesn't know if he can change status to H-1B. And he has, if I remember right, a PhD. And so definitely high level. And so kind of some things we're looking at is not only the ongoing litigation that we talked about in our last episode that we are still doing and still going through, but file early for any of these benefits, OPT, STEM OPT, H-1B. Employers, just keep up with your students, know what's going on, know that they're not some big bad criminal. A lot of these are minor traffic issues, and just try to have support for them and any contingency plans that they can.
All right. We also had the first kind of regulation that actually changed things that took effect January 2025. This was actually a Biden era regulation that took effect as soon as, well, 3 days before the Trump administration came in. This is a H-1B regulation. So we have a new definition of specialty occupation. We've eliminated the employer-employee relationship requirement and replaced it with bona fide employment without any real definition of what that means.
Let's be real.
Yeah. As opposed to fake employment, because, that happens all the time. It makes FDNS site visit participation mandatory. So FDNS is Fraud Detection National Security Directorate. It is this kind of enforcement arm also of USCIS, even though USCIS is supposed to be just a benefits granting agency, where they will basically look into, is this bona fide employment? And they do that through site visits. They may actually show up at the employer unannounced. They could show up at the client site unannounced, potentially at the employee's work location unannounced, or they might randomly send an email or phone call asking a series of questions. Up until January 2025, it was optional, voluntary to participate in that. And we many times recommended to our employers not to participate because we saw a lot of miscommunication, misunderstanding, misconstruing of the information that was given in a site visit that led to potential revocation of a very approvable and correctly approved H-1B. But now companies have to participate. They have to provide that information. This regulation also created a new option for entrepreneurs to access the H-1B. So you can, although there's no self-sponsorship, if you are an H-1B beneficiary, you own a company, your own company could potentially sponsor you, and you can do some administrative tasks related to the company, whereas before that was not allowed. You only could do specialty occupation work. So we may start seeing new types of requests for evidence related to this new specialty occupation definition and the new employer-employee relationship, which is now bona fide employment. We haven't really seen any yet, but I think it's coming, especially as we get into cap season. That tends to be where they test out the new RFE template.
Yeah, definitely. One thing I think is somewhat in the news, especially if you follow this space, is increased scrutiny and issues at consular posts when people go for visa stamping, and CBP scrutiny at the ports of entry. Even if you have a completely approved petition, you don't have a criminal record, you don't have any real issues. Consular officers have full discretion to deny visas for any reason. They can put it in administrative processing to allow them to do further investigation. That can take months, sometimes a year, for them to get through in order to grant you or deny the visa. And at the port of entry, CBP has full discretion to not admit anybody that isn't a citizen for any reason. And with these can come, punishments, I think is the word I'll use. If you get put in expedited removal by CBP because they completely misunderstand what's going on, or there's a miscommunication or a misunderstanding, it could be a 5-year bar, if not more, potentially. And so, frankly, I haven't seen a huge uptick on the CBP side. I have heard of consular issues. I do think it's coming, right? Because it kind of ebbs and flows. And so what do? Be informed. If you're an employer, make sure your employees are informed. If you're an employee, be fully informed on your end of what to expect at visa stamping, what's in your H-1B petition, be able to articulate it in a clear and concise manners. Most of these interactions are short. They're a couple minutes long. And they go off of what they feel like in that couple minutes. So be able to articulate it quickly and easily. Make sure you have updated documents. If you have an H-1B that was approved 2.5 years ago and now you're trying to enter, maybe carry a letter that says, "Yep, we're still hiring him," at the terms and conditions. And truthfully, and I hate to say this, our general guidance is don't take travel that you don't really need to. And I'm not going to sit there and judge anybody who does, but it's our job to kind of inform you of the risks and, maybe that vacation might need to wait, or at least you kind of understand the risks.
Yeah. Yeah, I think people need to understand administrative processing. It sounds like, oh, my visa's just on hold because they're continuing to process the application, but it's actually a refusal. It is a denial of your visa with the opportunity for them to later come back and approve it. So if you do have administrative processing, number one, you're stuck for months with not a whole lot of that you can do about it. But if you later get the visa approved, you still have to disclose on every DS-160, on your 485, on your I-539, that you have previously had a visa refused, even though you got the approval.
Right.
So just keep that in mind.
And make plans. Talk with your employer. I talk with a lot of our clients about, hey, what can we do? And they want to know, can they work remotely? Yeah. If they have work authorization in their home country, the immigration laws of the United States really don't apply. So obviously not available in every circumstances. Some companies have policy, security issues, international law issues. But if, there's nothing that prevents you from working abroad while this process goes out, but try to, be prepared.
All right. We are starting to see more scrutiny regarding third-party placement. This is largely in part of that new regulation on the H-1B that allows for site visits, making them mandatory. We see site visits mainly, I think, for third-party placement situations. This is consulting companies. This is where I hire John Doe and I place John Doe to work at ABC company, not with me at my office here at Reddy Newman Brown. So that's what we're talking about, third-party placement. You're placed at another company's work site, and they want to see that not anymore that you're having this employer-employee relationship, which was the right to control, supervise, hire, fire, pay. Now it's, do you have a bona fide employment? Do you actually have work available for this person? Is there a real job? Is that job actually a specialty occupation? So a lot of this is site visit based, is how they're checking into these things, but also RFEs. So we expect to see more RFEs asking for proof of the actual project, the contract, the work order, MSAs, SOWs, all of those things. You want to make sure that your filings are accurate. The LCA has to reflect the actual work site. No more of this, oh, I moved to this new work location and I'm filing the amendment 2 months later. You cannot do that. You will end up out of status by doing that.
And not something we've ever recommended, to be clear.
That's a good point. And so it's really important when you're preparing filings with USCIS that you include documentation of that bona fide employment, so that you can potentially avoid getting those types of requests for evidence.
Emily, something we've seen the Trump administration from Trump 1, Trump the second, the 2020 campaign, the 2024 campaign, and now is more enforcement. And that they've got tools with Department of Labor and ICE to ensure wage level compliance through Department of Labor, public access file compliance, and I-9 compliance. And I think this is going to be big. We heard of some uptick. Haven't heard of the worksite raids really in the high skilled legal immigration context. But we have seen an uptick a little bit on compliance questions. And, you have a lot of compliance when it comes to employment immigration, whether it's the public access files for an H-1B and a E-3 visa, which are LCA based with Department of Labor, making sure wage levels are being done, making sure everything's being done fairly. But the I-9 compliance, and I-9 is such a weird area where it is really much form over substance, where it has to be a specific way rather than, yeah, I verified the paperwork. And so, the M274 is available, but companies should consider internal audits now. It's smart. We do it every once in a while. Make sure our stuff is up to speed, with our team, because it's better to catch it now and make corrections, and that's totally fine, than get caught in an audit and potentially have penalties. With the H-1B, make sure you're going through that wage level analysis. There's an analysis through Department of Labor that takes what DOL says the job requires versus your job duties and comes up with the wage level. So make sure you're doing that, and don't try to undercut, workers by being cute with the SOC code by, really trying to round hole square peg it to a lower salary. That's what they're looking for.
Yeah, and employers of immigrants also need to be aware that the Department of Justice is kind of changing its focus when it comes to discrimination.
Mhm.
Historically, the DOJ is there to prevent discrimination of marginalized communities, minorities, those sorts of things, to make sure they have the same opportunities everyone else does. Now they're looking at, are U.S. workers being discriminated against in the hiring process? Are you favoring foreign workers over U.S. workers by hiring immigrants? And so there's just been a announcement about an investigation into a major company on that front. So that's definitely something to keep an eye on as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Also, we are starting to see and expecting to see more delays and uncertainty dealing with H4 EAD renewals and also L2 spouse work authorization renewals. So this is a hot topic for us over the years because we were involved in the litigation that reached the settlement requiring USCIS to process the I-129, the I-539, and the EAD application all together, and also that provided that L2s could work without having additional EAD card. So that was great. But that settlement about the concurrent filing and the bundling ended in January. So if USCIS wanted to, they could now separate the I-129 from the H4 and H4 EAD, and the H4 and H4 EAD could be delayed and take longer. The other thing to be aware of with the H4 EAD is, yes, it does qualify for automatic extension, to where if you file timely, you can have your EAD extended for up to 540 days while you're waiting for the renewal to come through. Automatic, but it's not automatic because it only works if your H4 has already been extended. So if you're typically filing H1, H4, and H4 EAD, it's the H4 extension that you're waiting on, and they won't approve the EAD until you have the H4 approved, and you can't get the auto extension until your H4 is approved, unless you travel and get it through automatic visa revalidation or go for stamping and come back in. So there may be extra steps you have to take to take advantage of the automatic EAD extension for H4s. And for L2s, there isn't one.
No.
Because there's no EAD filing anymore. If you file your L1 and L2 extensions together, the L1 is automatically extended work authorization for up to 240 days while the L1 is in process, even after the L1 I-94 expires. The L2 can stay in the country legally based on the L2 extension, but if the L2 expires before the new approval comes in, they are not authorized to work during that gap period. I just had a case where she unfortunately had to stop working for about a week or two, and we just got the approval notice today, so now she can get back to work. But so you really need to be watchful of those processing times for the spouses when they're working.
Emily, what are you seeing in terms of the concurrent employment? I feel like every time I go through our mail, it's almost officer dependent. Sometimes we'll see the H4 EAD, the L2 concurrent. Sometimes it's a week later. Sometimes it's a few months later. I don't have any sense on what they're doing.
Yeah, I don't think they know what they're doing. But I would say, based on my cases, probably 90% of the time they're either still being approved together or within a week of each other.
That's what I'm seeing
maybe
most.
10% of the time they somehow get separated and the H4 ends up in a black hole.
Most of the times are still okay right now if you file early, but do that. Speaking of processing times, national interest waivers are up. Filings are up with USCIS, and that's because of the perm issue we discussed earlier. The national interest waiver allows you to waive the perm recruitment process. You still have to go through, some of the processes, but you can show that your position is integral to, it's in the national interest to approve you and have a green card. And there's a lot of things that they look at. We did a whole podcast episode that we talked about national interest waivers with me and Ryan Wilk. But what I think is interesting and some of the nitty gritty is more companies are sponsoring NIWs than ever before. It's one where you can self sponsor, but we're seeing more companies say, we'll help you do this rather than going through the perm process because they have employees that qualify. And, a lot of times the what is in the national interest ebbs and flows with politics. The Biden administration said AI and emerging technologies, and now we're seeing more oil and gas, cases being brought and being successful, and still some with the AI. But again, this helps, companies, you can move a lot quicker, especially someone who's facing a max out on their visa. And so something for companies to consider and individuals to consider is this national interest waiver process.
And that's the I-140 petition. And speaking of I-140s, we've kind of got a new development that impacts both I-140s and I-129s. And this really started around April 9th was the first time we saw it. Again, no change in policy announced, nothing in the regulations, nothing in the statute. But all of a sudden, USCIS is sending RFEs to the company who filed the I-129, which typically is for an H or an L or an O1 or a TN, or the I-140 petition. These are usually perm-based I-140s where we've gone through the labor certification process and are now at the second step. They're saying that they have potentially adverse information related to the beneficiary, that's the employee. And in order to continue processing, they're requesting the current address of the beneficiary so that they can send that person for biometrics. Now, number one, they say we found potentially adverse information, but they don't tell you what that potentially adverse information is. And by law, USCIS is supposed to tell you when there's adverse information and that they plan to take any action on it because they're supposed to give you the opportunity to respond and rebut whatever this adverse information could be. Maybe they've got it completely wrong. Maybe they did a criminal records check and my name popped up because I was a victim of domestic violence, which we've seen. We don't know exactly what the adverse information is yet. Number two, for I-129s and I-140s, there's no biometrics requirement. There's nothing in the form instructions, there's nothing in the regulation, nothing in the statute. At one point, they did have biometrics for the I-539, which is used for the dependents to extend, but not on the main applicant, the I-129 and the I-140. So we've just started responding to these, making a lot of legal arguments that what you're asking for is ridiculous and not required, and you need to give us notice of this adverse information and an opportunity to inspect the record and all of these kind of things. But we have not seen USCIS's response yet. So we're waiting to see if we are going to get a biometrics notice. We're waiting to see if they're going to tell us what the adverse information is and give us a chance to respond. But with those biometrics notice, I mean, if they're coming, if they're saying there's adverse information and maybe it's a criminal issue and they're sending you for biometrics, this is something now to be concerned about possible detention by ICE, which is completely nothing that had ever happened before.
But no, I mean, there's that story in the national news about that one individual who went to his citizenship interview and was arrested. And so I'm not here to fearmonger, but we have to look through kind of what we're seeing as potential long-term impacts. The asking for the evidence is something, an argument we've created because it is required under the regulations, and it tees up some very interesting litigation if it gets denied and they say, no, we're not giving it to you. That's been litigation we've worked on before. And that's what we're teeing up is a clean record if we need to. Emily, I think kind of our final topic is the human element. Since November to January, you kind of had this split with foreign nationals of some are like, great, he's gonna be good for business and legal immigration. Um, but since January, we've seen that sentiment kind of go down, and we've seen people seeing the anxiety, having that anxiety, having that stress of, oh, I got a speeding ticket. Is this going to impact my immigration? And it never should, but everybody is more nervous than ever. And I feel for you. I'm, sorry that it's like that right now. But it is the way it is right now with the administration. I think one of their big points, and going back to this adverse information, I think part of it is to distill fear and put fear in the individuals. And maybe you're not going to proceed with that benefit. So, just follow the right information. There's a lot of bad information out there with regards to immigration. I could tell you, Emily and I are very active on social media, and we're not posting something without independently verifying it. Unless we say, I have heard from somebody blank. But I usually don't push those rumors. So just follow the right information. Listen to our podcast. We'll try to get you that. Companies just try to understand. Companies, schools that are listening to this, just understand. Sometimes you've got to be the shoulder to cry on. Sometimes with these employees, and that we've seen that on our end. And I don't mean that lightly, but it's a tough time for immigrants right now.
Yeah, for sure. So, on that note, that is your top 10 rundown of what's been going on in employment based immigration so far and how quickly things have changed without any change in law, without any new regulations, except for maybe one minor one. So, if today's episode helped you stay ahead in this fast changing immigration landscape, be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, Spotify, Apple, YouTube, so you never miss an update. And thanks for joining us.
Yeah, and if you ever have a topic, what's keeping you up at night thinking about on immigration? I'm a nerd when it comes to this, and I'll kind of think of some topics. But we want to do this for you guys that are listening. And if you've got a topic and you say, "Hey, we want to talk about this," we'll look into it, and happy to do topics that people say this is what I want to hear. So thank you.
All right, we'll talk soon and keep those visa vibes strong.